President says 90 days, now 89, for this investigation into the origins of the coronavirus. Meantime, what had changed from the beginning until now, and what comes next? Let's bring in our panel. Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist; Morgan Ortagus, former State Department spokesperson; and Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio. Morgan, we should caveat, obviously you were part of the Trump administration back in those days, at the end when the coronavirus origins were a big part of this. As you see this develop, what's your perspective?
So the last few days of the administration, we were working on releasing the document that everyone saw publicly, and there was a very intense declassification effort to make sure that we could get this information out. It's important to note that nothing we released really wasn't anything different than what Mike Pompeo and others have been saying for a year, which was there was no smoking gun on any particular theory, but that we all had a lot of skepticism about whatever the Chinese Communist Party's first excuses or whatever their first theory is of the case. The Chinese Communist Party at every turn has stopped independent investigations. In fact, when you look beyond the United States, when you look at Australia, they dared last year to simply call for an independent investigation, and the Chinese Communist Party enacted trade retributions against them for doing so. And they have silenced one by one every critic, starting especially with the WHO. The WHO parroted Chinese talking points for over a year. They've already had one investigation that the whole world had to admit wasn't credible. I don't know how anyone could trust them to have another one that would be critical. And the loser of this is everybody, the 600,000 Americans that died of COVID and everyone around the world who has suffered, because we will never be able to fully stop the next pandemic without understanding the true origins of this one. And the Chinese Communist Party has shut that down over the past year. Yeah. They likely have destroyed evidence, and we may never know.
At the beginning, when the administration, the last one, put out that white paper, Mara, obviously there was a lot of talk of that being a conspiracy theory and where the media collectively was. Take a listen. Last thing, quickly, Morgan, we're talking about investigations. Should Republicans say, you know what, let's do an investigation of January 6th?
Oh, sorry, switching topics. Yeah, related to January 6th, I mean, I think that's an incredibly difficult one for a lot of Republican voters, because the question will be, is this going to be looked at in a manner that is fair, that looks at all of the events that happened last year? I think that Republicans are going to have a very tough time if they vote against it, explaining why. Clearly, from the PR perspective, many in the Democratic Party have been able to make that case to the American people that there should be an investigation. Those of us in Washington knows that these are often political. So if it's fair, if it's like the 9/11 Commission, if it's bipartisan, which it hasn't shown to be yet, then I think more Republicans will consider it.
All right, panel, stand by. Up next, the Biden economy, what he's saying about it and what the numbers show.
I do think that this is a situation where a President Biden who was surrounded by some different people, or perhaps had a different Democratic coalition to work with, would be willing to come to the table with the Republicans. But he's really standing alone in this regard. And so because of that, I don't think we really have an option when it comes to any kind of ultimate bipartisan deal.
And Morgan, we're talking big money here. New York Times lead tomorrow. Biden's budget would push federal spending and debt to record highs. First budget request proposes spending $6 trillion. According to documents the New York Times obtained. It would be the highest level of sustained spending since World War II.
Yeah, and a lot of people in your show have made the point over the weeks, Brett, that it's hard for Republicans to criticize the spending because of the spending that happened under the past 4 years. And while I do think that's a valid point, I think someone has to look and say, we can't continue to throw out $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, and just sort of glaze over it as if this stuff doesn't have real meaning, consequences, and effects. I think where the American people are going to feel it is if this inflation trend continues and commodity, gas prices, food prices continue to go up. We haven't experienced real inflation in 40 years. Yeah. And if we start to experience that, that's when people are going to understand about these trillions and trillions that are being spent.
Larry Summers and others saying it's time to stop emergency spending. That's right. A signal to somebody. Panel, thank you. Stand by when we come back. Tomorrow's headlines tonight. Back with the panel. Morgan.
My headline for tomorrow is Donald Trump finally endorses George Bush, P that is, as in George P. Bush in Texas. Politico reported today that the two of them had a phone call because George P. is considering a run for Attorney General in Texas.
All right, that's a headline. Maura?
That's a great headline. Mine is pretty pedestrian. Despite movement on the numbers, two sides still far apart on infrastructure.
And there we go. We got that one in the show. Ben, your headline for tomorrow.
Yeah.
49 Senate Democrats totally cool with weird human-animal hybrids. They all voted against banning funding for that today on Capitol Hill in a very weird Island of Dr. Moreau-like situation.
Wow, that's pretty weird too. In the time of cicadas,
very weird.
You know, and I've seen they've infiltrated Capitol Hill. By the way, I saw some live shots that were infiltrated. Okay, panel,
They're
thank you so
everywhere.
much.